is what?
John
1, 1 to 4. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men.
Light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness to the light, that all men through him might believe.
Good morning. We get our PowerPoint up. I think we're there. Good. This morning is the morning I know you've all been waiting for, when the elders have the opportunity to speak. We've committed that it will be less than an hour and a half, so we'll get you out of here before dinner tonight. He was an old man, probably 60 years old. That was at least old in those days. He was in prison. And he was very uncertain as to whether or not he would ever get out. And while in that circumstance, he was writing a series of 4 letters to churches that he had worked with, that he had helped establish over a period of about 15 years. He was writing the last one. And it would be easy in that circumstance, maybe even expected, that you would spend your time reminiscing on the time that you had spent together, reflecting on the past, talking about the good days. But in this particular situation, Paul takes a very different approach. Let's read from Philippians 3, verses 10 to 14. I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. Not that I've already obtained all this, or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind, and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. I press on. Paul recognized that regardless of the stage of life you're in, regardless of the circumstance that you find yourself in, the goal, the imperative for a Christian, for a church, is to press on, to move forward, to press ahead. That means to grow, to learn, to look to the future and not dwell and live in the remembrance of the past. Today, that's our focus as we look to 2018 in this church. You know, as we look back at 2017, overall it was a good year for this church. Yes, we lost some loved ones. We gained some new. But overall, it was a year that we finally sort of got on our feet again. It was a full year of having a preacher and his family with us. You know, one of our goals last year, if you remember in our speaking, was we just want to keep the Webbs for a year. Thought that would be nice. Well, we accomplished that goal, and now we hope to keep them for many, many more. And in having the Webbs here for a year, we were able to start some new initiatives and to begin to move forward. But it would be easy for us to step back and go, okay, we're done. We got that. We've got our preacher. Now we can settle in. But the enemy of pressing forward is to settle for where we have been. And so as we look to what we're going to talk about today, yes, we're going to talk about our finances in 2017. We're going to talk about what that means for what we're going to ask for 2018. But more importantly, we're going to talk about key priorities that we're going to initiate this year to help us move forward in 2018. So to help us start on that path, I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
I think most of you know I work for a truck company. We make big trucks, not those little things like Greg drives. But one of the things you may not know is those trucks have 18 forward gears. So trucks spend a lot of time moving forward. And that's what we're going to do today. But unfortunately, before we do that, we've got to kind of back off and we got to be a rear view mirror guy. Because we got to start looking a little bit at what happened behind us. And that's at 2017. And when we look at our budget, you ask the question, well, what really makes up our budget? We basically have 4 silos. You'll see there that there's missions and benevolence. That includes our Haiti, Honduras mission trips, member and non-member benevolence in Camp Manatawny. Also our family and worship. That's our adult and children's education, men's and women's ministries, youth activities, worship, and fellowship. Staff and office operations, that comes with salaries, benefits, and office expenses. And then building and maintenance. And I use this because Greg Rominger is not quite totally listening. That budget piece is fluid. And we'll leave it at that and we'll talk about it a little bit more. First of all, I want to take a look at the income. That's what came into us last year. I work for a company that is big on charts. And I tell you, if I have this one every year, I'll stay employed. This is a fantastic results. We're looking and we're comparing the last 3 years, so 2015 through 2017. And it's just great seeing that kind of growth. So when we look at that growth, our regular contribution in 2015, when you look at that at a little over $200,000, and in 17 at almost $274,000, that's a 28.5% increase. Now, what I'm not is a mathematician, but I can kind of break it down that it's over 14% a year growth. That's commendable. God's blessed us. But then when you look at your total income, that's even more impressive. For the first time in 10 years, this congregation paid a minister a full year's full-time salary. And we still wound up with an increase modestly at 29%. So very impressive numbers in 2017. And it's great for what you got coming in. The key is what's going out. And taking a look at our expenses, again in those silos, when we look at missions and benevolence, so much of our budget is fixed. When we look at building and maintenance and we look at support ministry, those are fixed. So with our discretionary income, the largest area that those funds go are toward the missions and benevolence work. We also have the support ministries, that's family and worship. You look at both of those, last year the expenses have been about the same over the 3 years. Not a lot of change drastically. Support ministries does show a change, but again, we knew that we had salary coming in there. Building and maintenance. You look at 2015, you've got a pretty sizable number. 16 had an HVAC unit go out, you see a spike. So what I'm talking about, fluid. Last year, I'm not sure. I think Greg just bought Band-Aids because you look at what we spent last year on this building, and I got to tell you, you got a 25-year-old building, it's like Christmas morning. You don't know what you have till you open up the present. And that's kind of what you get. We really don't know. But the last little line all the way over, you'll see where it says net income. And if you'll look in 2015 and 2016, it was a fairly common occurrence for us. We operated in the red. It's not the ideal place, but we do have some savings, and we had to dip into that. We were totally prepared to do that last year. But if you look, we ended up with a surplus. So we operated in the black. That's outstanding. We did not disturb our savings to operate last year. And now I'll turn it over to Greg to be able to talk about the 2018 budget.
Outstanding news, right? Paul walked us through what makes up our budget and our trends over the past 3 years. Nice trending, right? Now let's take a look at our 2018 budget. We'll begin with income, and with the graphic that you can see behind me, what makes up our income is our regular weekly contributions, just like we had a few minutes ago. And then we have our special contributions. So when we have special contributions, like when we have trips to Haiti or to Honduras or special opportunities to give, those are very important as well, besides our weekly contributions. So when you combine those together, you get our total income. So moving forward, assuming we're going to give about the same with our special contributions, about $40,000 last year, you can see our combined income last year was a little over $314,000. For 2018, we project with a modest increase of about 2.2% a week. Folks, that's $139 a week, just to kind of give you an order of magnitude. Not a whole lot. But in order to do that, with our special contributions, obviously it's important for us to continue, giving when we have opportunity for these special opportunities. This is important to kind of set the baseline, because what we're going to look at next is the budget, how we're going to do God's work here. So when we break it down into those four silos that Paul spoke of, we look at our anticipated expenses. We see many of new budget numbers here that compare very similarly to our 2017 budget, or they reflect a modest increase overall. Our focus this year will be on our mission trips, building our knowledge and faith, and local outreach. The supporting Mission Lazarus and their efforts in Honduras and Haiti with our annual trips remains a top priority. The large difference in our benevolence budget, if you're looking at the numbers there, you'll see, wow, about $7,900 last year versus $6,000 this year. Just want to point that out, because we did have a special need last year that we were able to help with. But the budget number this year will fall back in line with what we normally do in that arena. Our youth and education programs, our incredible VBS program, and increasing fundings this year to support Camp Manatani, all contribute to our vital efforts in building our foundation of knowledge and faith. We're also seeing activity with our new local outreach programs. Mark and Vanessa and many of the congregation here have stepped in and are working with Friends Speak. In fact, if you've been paying attention, you'll see that our fellowship hall during class time is being used for that. We have Friends Speak already in action there. There's also another group that's being supported, and the Pats are also helping with this effort, is the Grief Share program. Two very vital programs that are helping fill needs of caring and sharing in our community. As we continue looking at the budget for support ministries and building and maintenance, we see keeping the KOP family taken care of is a sizable part of our budget. Salaries and benefits for our staff, counseling services for our church family, and those outside our immediate family here for our neighborhoods is important. Managing those costs and keeping our building functioning and the lights on takes constant attention. Greg Rominger and Dan Culp have done a phenomenal job controlling costs while maintaining and improving services. As an example, did you know, of course there's not a lot of snow out there right now, but cutting grass and removing snow, we actually pay less today than we did 5 years ago. And that's due to the efforts of folks like Greg and Dan keeping focus and paying attention to that and helping ensure that where we spend our money is to help the Lord's work. As our building reaches the quarter-century mark, we're having to address some system repairs. Paul mentioned the fact that we had to replace a HVAC unit here recently. Bottom line, we ended last year with a nice surplus of about $8,600. This year we're targeting a break-even budget, as you can see, of about $166 in surplus. With the fluid situation with an aging building, we'll see how close we can come to that. With sustained special contribution giving and a special bump up in our weekly contributions, we can accomplish what we've outlined. As we transition to the 2018 initiatives, our focus is transformation. Transforming lives through our service to others, our KOP family life and spiritual growth, transforming our facilities and surroundings to better serve the family's needs here, and transforming our worship and praise to glorify our Father. Paul?
Should have told Andrew less standing today before we had to do all of this. So we're going to talk about now is transforming lives. And in a few minutes, you're going to hear a lot of different things, some exciting things that you're going to see about the physical part of the building, some different things that are going on there. But I want to spend some time now talking about and addressing the spiritual growth and development for every person and for this congregation in 2018. First of all, I want to read what Paul said to Timothy in 1 Timothy 1, verses 12. I know who I've believed, and am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. If you haven't noticed, and I know if you read the paper or you listen to the news, we're under attack. And a lot of what we're talking about is going to be, you're going to have to make a stand. And I don't care if you're 7 or 70, you're going to have to take a stand. And how are we going to help in doing that? Well, the first is, that the world is increasingly dismissing God, and the faith in God. So we've got to address that. And what do I believe in? And why do I believe that? Am I able and willing to articulate my beliefs to friends and family? Do we as a church adequately communicate what we believe to those who are seeking a church home? And then lastly, do we live and serve as those who are a changed and transformed family? Again, Paul writing to the Romans says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. One of the things that we'll be working on shortly will be a statement of faith. And we've already identified a task force or a committee that's going to serve on that. They don't know it yet, but they'll be contacted in the next couple of days. So our teaching and preaching this year will be designed to help us define and articulate what we believe and why we believe it. So we'll continue to provide opportunities for service, missions, local outreach, and ministering to those people that are in need. Like I said, this committee is going to get formed, and we know that it'll take a little bit of time, but they're going to have a deadline, because we found that just kind of going on, we'll be doing this again next year. So there will be a time frame. But they're going to be looking to come up with this statement of faith, and it'll be posted on our website. Many of you are still old enough to remember you used to have a Yellow Pages, and you used to have this big bulky book. Well, people do all of that today with a phone or a tablet. They're looking online. So when people look and see, they know what we're all about before they ever get here. We've got to address things that are relevant to the issues in our culture. Things that are going to distinguish us as being unique in the community of faith. And to inform and let people know about our mission and outreach at King of Prussia. Whenever I do presentations, and particularly at church, I always try to find something new, something that I've never done. Today, we're going to talk about Tom Petty. I told you that we were in a fight, that you're in a battle, and you're going to have to take a stand because people are going to challenge what you believe and why you think the way you think. I like what Tom Petty had to say. He says that, no, I'll stand my ground, won't be turned around, and I'll keep this world from dragging me down. I'm going to stand my ground, and I won't back down. And then he says, well, I know what's right. I got just one life, and a world that keeps on pushing me around, but I'll still stand my ground, and I won't back down. Good words for us as we enter 2018. And then to look what Paul has to say to the Ephesians. And Paul addresses this whole thing about it's a battle, it's a fight. He said, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Mark? Or it's Greg again, sorry.
There's probably a few of us here that remember our old building. Show of hands. How many of you? Oh, there's actually a decent number here. This building was a huge change from what I used to affectionately refer to as the flying nun hat. Remember the roof line? It always reminded me of Sally Field and that old show, The Flying Nun. The functionality of this building compared to that old building, vastly different, vastly different. 25 years later, and that's hard to believe, we reflect on things that have changed since we custom designed that building to meet our needs in the early 90s. We see it all around us, where we work, where we attend school, and even in our homes, and what HGTV tells us our homes ought to look like, right? Change in the environment where we work, learn, and spend time with our families. It's all a part of how we go through life. Our environment impacts how we're able to carry out our service, how we interact with our family, the community, and in this case, in our church family in the building here, how we serve those, not only internally, but also those around us. In 2018, we want to focus on three areas in this part of our transformation: our facilities, our health and safety, and enabling technology. We recognize these initiatives will require some investment and will most likely fall outside our 2018 contribution budget. So how we creatively determine how to spend our money, whether it be savings or special contributions, etc., that will be determined, and the time is right, certainly, to make an investment in our future. And certainly, with an $8,600 surplus from last year, we have kind of a springboard to kind of help us on our way, right? Our building is reaching a major milestone. It's served us well for 25 years, and we pray that it will continue to serve us and our needs for another 25 and well beyond. As we reflect on the environments, as we've talked about, where we live and work and go to school, we recognize certainly the changes that have happened in how best to serve those needs. So we've set some goals for the group that's already addressing the discovery process and exploring how the church of the future might look. Beginning with health and safety, we certainly recognize the need to address the changing needs that balance security for our staff, our families, and those using our facilities during the week. We've all been saddened when we see the news and the attacks on houses of worship in schools. So what we've done in the last few weeks is met with local law enforcement to discuss concerns and strategies on what's appropriate and how best to address this changing world. We've had security industry experts come in, and we've already received some proposals on how we might better secure our facility, not only for our staff during the week and for others that use this facility during the week, but also for the family here. So in addition to that, another add is in most of the workplaces you go to and in malls, etc., you see these AEDs or these defibrillators. We want to add one of those because we also recognize, hey, a heart attack can happen anywhere, and we want to be able to help support and sustain life until help can get here. So for health and safety this year, we will secure building access for the staff during off hours. We will add some security cameras to help promote a secure environment and to keep an eye on things. We'll be adding that defibrillator that I mentioned and developing and executing plans for fire and emergency response, including drills. Schools have them, workplaces have them. Why can't we have them, right? So what would we do if the fire alarm went off right now? If there was a fire and someone pulled the fire alarm, what do you do? Do we sit here and go, is it a false alarm? That's kind of the first reaction, right? No, surely there's not a fire, right? Well, no. What do we do? So we want to address that. And for the groups that are using, there's lots of groups that use the facility during the week. We want to address that as well on how best to help people know what to do in the event of an emergency. So taking a look at technology, another part of our initiative here, we look at 4 top reasons for using technology. Why do we need more technology? Well, technology used wisely certainly enhances and touches our lives daily. My guess is 98.935% of this audience has a smartphone, either in your pocket or in your phone. Actually, it may be closer to 100%. You may also have iPads that you look at the scriptures on, etc. We use technology every day. So here we want to help you start using some of that technology to enrich relationships and staying connected with members and those in the community and for involvement. Technology is growing a little bit long in the tooth in a few places here. Some of it's been here for a while, so we want to fold in technology that many of us in the workplace use every day. How many of you use, show of hands, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, Skype on a regular basis? Look at that. There's a lot of hands in here. Why can't we use that technology to help connect to our shut-ins or people that are suffering with health issues that can't be here? What a wonderful way to use technology. That's low-hanging fruit, folks. We can do that tomorrow. All we have to do is make some adjustments in how we do things to be able to do that. That's just one example of the list you see here. But streaming worship so that others can see not only live but in retrospect or recorded, they can do that. How about virtual Bible classes during the week? Say we want to get together on a Tuesday night and share some time. And you know what? Maybe there's a snowstorm, we can't get out. Just another example. Dave Stevens has just recently helped us, and by the way, Dave, we're good to go. We're gonna roll with that technology of helping schedule our volunteers for worship. It sends you an email and reminds you. It lets you give feedback to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be out that weekend, but it gives you a list of who to contact for a possible replacement. Just another example. Our overarching goal is, when possible, fold these new technologies also into the discovery efforts of the group on how to improve our facility. With that, Mark?
So we've talked about how we want to transform lives this year and how we're going to work on our preaching and our teaching to focus us on that, and how we're going to develop a statement of faith that clearly articulates that. We've talked about what we want to do with the building, to update it, to increase technology, to increase the health and safety aspects that are so necessary in this time. So finally, we want to talk about how we want to transform our worship. So the first question is probably, why do we need to think about transforming our worship? And the fact is, we have a new generation. This is a new generation that has different ways of interacting, different ways of reflecting, different ways of communicating. So what makes that different than any generation in the past? Well, what I can tell you is, in the past, typically as a generation came up, they began to adopt the ways of communicating of the generations in front of them. What's different about this generation is older generations are adopting the way the new generation communicates. The way that we get on Facebook, the way that we get on Snapchat, the way that we get on websites. The new generation is driving the way communication is going to be done. And communication that happens at home, communication that happens in the workplace, is inevitably communication that needs to happen in the worship place as well. And so we have got to be people who are open to change in the way that we have done things as we seek to be relevant, important, and outreaching to a new generation that's coming up. I love this quote that came from Live Forgiven. It's a website, of course, about millennials, and it says, millennials are drawn to a mix of casual, but also classic, of quiet, down-to-earth, but also modern elements, and participatory experiential worship. We must be creative with each new generation to re-articulate, to help them rediscover the ancient and timeless truths of the gospel through all that we do. What we have to recognize is the Bible gave us freedom in a framework to talk about how we're going to worship and how we express our praise to God. And that framework is defined in Ephesians 5 in the quote that's on the screen. Be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. There's a tremendous amount of freedom inside of that framework. And in this generation, we need to explore it. So what does transformed worship really mean in a practical level? Well, it means, as it has always meant, that we begin with Spirit-filled and God-focused worship. Methods, tools, resources are always and need to always be secondary to the focus of our worship, which is to glorify God. So, what's different? Well, in this new generation, we need to be more participatory. And by the way, you're already seeing that. The way that the scripture reading was done this morning with the Cornwalls, doing it as a family, was awesome. more participatory than what we would have seen 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and that's just one example. We need to be more creative, right? That means that you may see more discussions and not just preaching. You may see more people up singing and not just one person leading. You may see us completely blow up the order of worship because the way that we have done our liturgy is not important. It's what the focus needs to be to glorify God and to help all generations feel like they can be participative. Participatory means all people in more active ways participating in the worship. That means the how, the who, the where, and the when need to be rethought of. And it needs to be more creative in that when you think about the Bible and Jesus talking about in his parable in Matthew 9, you don't put new wine into old wineskins. You put new wine into new wineskins, old wine into old wineskins, and in that way, both of them can be preserved. We're not talking about throwing away everything we've ever done. What we're talking about is incorporating in other things to help us reach both those who have traditionally been part of our fellowship and those who may not have been and we seek to be. And we need to understand that we've got to be geared to the needs of the future and not be bound to the traditions of the past. We press on. I had my church history class at Abilene Christian from a professor by the name of Lemoyne Lewis. Over the course of all of my time of going to school, I can tell you he was far and away the favorite professor I ever had. And one of his quotes that I just loved was, "Those who believe that there was always a church meeting in a building with the sign Church of Christ over the door, singing 2 songs, a prayer, a song, the Lord's Supper, and then the sermon, are going to be very disappointed when they get to heaven." What we have adopted as our traditions that have served us well are not necessarily gospel. And by the way, they haven't necessarily always been done. So we are going to seek to worship in ways that are relevant to the society that we live in today and that reach a new generation of people. Our model has always been leaders and followers, doers and viewers. Worship cannot be that as we move forward. It has to be participatory. It has to be all people having an active role. And that's what we will be looking to do. And so it brings us to the end of our presentation this morning. In 1804, Thomas Jefferson commissioned a couple of men on a mission to go and explore the newly purchased Louisiana Purchase. Not only to explore it, but to find a way from that newly annexed land all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Because Jefferson knew that if we could find a way to have trade routes all the way from the land that we owned and controlled to the Pacific Ocean, that this country could become great because of its capability to reach both oceans. And so the two men, as most of you will remember from your high school history, were Lewis and Clark. And they were commissioned to put together a team which they called the Corps of Discovery Expedition. And what they did is they began in St. Louis, and they took canoes, and they began navigating up the Mississippi River, then to the Missouri, and their goal was to find a continuous waterway passage from the Mississippi all the way to the Pacific Ocean. What they knew of the eastern and middle half of the U.S. led them to believe that that's what they would find as they went west as well. The ability for rivers to take you all the way from one ocean all the way to the next. So they made their journey. They started working their way up through Missouri and Nebraska and up to North Dakota. and they encountered something they did not expect to see. This big range of mountains as they got to Montana, called the Rocky Mountains. Unlike any mountains they had ever seen before, and by the way, that didn't include a river that passed right through the middle of them. And so they realized that their assumptions that everything would be as they expected it to be and as it had been in the past were not relevant assumptions. They were now facing a new reality, new obstacles, and new challenges, and they had to make a decision. Are we going to abort the mission, go back and tell Jefferson, there is no continuous waterway, our mission's over, you ask us to find it, we can't find it? Or were they going to really think about their true mission? And their true mission was to be a core of discovery. So if there isn't a continuous waterway that gets there, how can we get to the Pacific Ocean? So they abandoned their canoes, literally left them on the side of the river, and they started finding Indian guides who knew the area. And those Indian guides led them on trails that no European or American white man had ever seen before. And they walked them through those trails over the Continental Divide, and on the other side, they found the Columbia River, where they stole canoes, by the way, the part we don't like to talk about, and then navigated all of the rest of the way to the Pacific Ocean. You see, they recognized that their real goal wasn't just to find a waterway. Their real goal was to get to the end objective. Forgetting what is behind, straining forward to what is ahead, to press on. They landed in Seaside, Oregon, where there is a Lewis and Clark Museum today. And they found the trade route that really redefined the United States as we know it today. You see, they found that if you're not going to abort, you have to adapt. And that's where we sit today, is the decision, do we just abort what we've always done because it doesn't seem to be working anymore for the new generation? Or do we adapt? And do we keep our mission at the forefront, which is to become more and more like Christ and to reach out to a lost and dying world and to bring them in to His church, which will last forevermore? Our old skills, our old resources, our old perspectives may no longer be enough. And now we, like Lewis and Clark, have to make a choice. Are we going to look for new resources, develop new skills and new tools, and achieve the mission that God has given to us? Paul gave us a model. We press on. We move forward. And so 2018 will be a year where we will reach out. We will abandon the canoes where it's appropriate. We will look for new routes to get to where we were going, and then we may pick up the canoes again if it's appropriate. There's a great book that I've begun reading, or actually getting for all of the elders, called Canoeing the Mountains, which uses the story of Lewis and Clark as a model for leadership in the church, and talking about how all churches need to be thinking about this kind of change as we look at the opportunities of tomorrow. And what that book calls us to think about is the church of tomorrow looks like this. Sure doesn't look like me. And so as we're thinking about our building, as we're thinking about our technology, as we're thinking about the way we communicate our faith, that last picture is the picture we need to have in our minds, because that's the sustainment of the church in 10 years, in 20 years, 30 years. And then we leave it to them to adapt for the next generation. So 2018, we're moving forward. We want to say thank you to every one of you who has helped to drive those contributions up so unbelievably over the last couple of years, and we're asking for a little more this year. not for ourselves, but so that we can accomplish the mission that's before us. And if we do that, we will do it for the glory of God. Let's all stand and sing.